The morning rush hour commute already takes an hour and a half to drive 35 miles from Murfreesboro to Nashville. Middle Tennessee's 10-county population is projected to increase by 80% to reach 3.1 million by 2040. Rutherford County alone is expected to add nearly 200,000 and reach a population of nearly 500,000 in that time. There are a few issues that are more pressing than commuter traffic to and from Nashville. We all experience it as we commute to and from work in the Nashville area. And that's one of the issues that we're here to talk about today. It reminds me of the song from James Taylor, Damn That Traffic Jam. And here to discuss that with us is Steve Bland. He's the CEO of the Regional Transportation Authority. You were appointed in 2014, and you've worked in other markets like Pittsburgh and Albany, New York. And now you have the challenge of working with this system.
Yep. And it is a challenge, and you hit the nail on the head, Mike. Particularly for folks out here in Rutherford County, you see that traffic every day on I-24. Seems to literally get worse every day, and there's measurements to suggest that that's actually true. So that's a key challenge for all of us in the region to work on, is how do we make those commutes more manageable?
I think most people out there would probably have the sentiment that they wish this problem were solved today, that it should have been solved yesterday. But there is a process in place, and it's always more complicated than the average person understands. Let's talk about what the process is, what process you're going through now.
Well, right now, the Regional Transportation Authority of Middle Tennessee, along with the Nashville Metro Transit Authority, so the two together, are doing an overall regional mass transit planning process we're calling nMotion. N, small n, capital M, motion. If you go to nmotion2016.org, you can get all sorts of information. But beginning in April of 2015, we started to engage thousands of Middle Tennesseans to find out what their core issues were associated with traffic, transit, and mobility. And we had about 9,000 folks engaged in that process. Specifically in the Murfreesboro area in Rutherford County, tons of folks said, look, if you can make it faster than my car, I will use it. I would look forward to that option. Right now we get a number of commuters on a daily basis who are happy to get on the bus. They can text without getting in trouble. They can do their email, they can read, but they're stuck in the same traffic with everybody else. And what they're telling us very clearly and concisely is, make it faster than my car and I'll use it. So that's a lot of what the nMotion process is about.
So there are a number of alternatives that you're looking at, and I think you're starting to present that to groups across the Middle Tennessee region. Let's talk about those alternatives.
Sure. We're referring to the alternatives as scenarios, and you can consider them as, should we do this or that? You can also look at it as saying, well, let's do this right now and then build toward doing the bigger things over time. So the scenarios are broken down. What we're calling Scenario 1 is a comprehensive regional mass transit system. So if you think of what Denver's done in the last 30 years, or Dallas, or Salt Lake City, it has rail in it, it has very high-end bus rapid transit in it, it has extensive additions to service. One of the biggest complaints we get, particularly in Rutherford County, is, well, there just aren't enough trips. So it adds a lot of trips. It also, frankly, accommodates increases in local service. So services like Murfreesboro Rover would see increases to make getting around Murfreesboro easier. That's Scenario 1. If you go down to Scenario 3, it talks really primarily about service enhancements, a few more trips, and a lot of technology integration. How do we make it easier to use? Things like mobile fare payment, real-time information, integrated trip planning. So maybe, okay, I want to, take mass transit into downtown Nashville, but that's not where I'm going. So how do we connect with an Uber or a Lyft or one of those types of private sector services to complete a full trip in the simplest and cheapest way possible?
So these issues involve buses and trying to improve the situation short term, but there's also been a lot of discussion about monorail or light rail. Where does that fit into this process?
Sure. The Scenario 1, the highest end solution, does call for light rail, specifically a fair amount of it in Davidson County in the Nashville market. And with respect to Murfreesboro and Rutherford County, in the Murfreesboro Road corridor. So for instance, Nashville International Airport would be served via the Murfreesboro Road corridor, and then that would connect to broader regional services that would likely operate in the Interstate 24 corridor. I know Senator Ketron, who's from this area, has sponsored public-private partnership legislation. So one of the advantages, if we can get the PPP legislation to pass, hopefully by the time this show is airing, it will have already passed and we'll have it in place, would be to tap the creativity of the private sector to look to those higher-end alternatives. So that could be monorail, it could be light rail, it could be something where private sector creativity, both in terms of how to develop a system, but frankly also how to finance a system, come into play to come up with an even better and longer range alternative.
Apparently TDOT is also conducting or been asked to conduct a study for the long term. I would assume that includes if there were some kind of rail implemented along I-24, would be how that would be constructed and where it would fit. To what extent have you all looked at how doable that is and what would it entail?
Well, you're 100% correct. TDOT is central to all of this, whether it's mass transit or roadways. I-24 is obviously their right-of-way, as are most of the other significant roads, Murfreesboro Road or the 840 corridor between Rutherford and Williamson County, for instance. We've had lots of conversations with them. For instance, one of the things we're collaborating on is, and I would call it a shorter-term alternative, is an approach called bus on shoulder, where sections of I-24 might be configured so that we could operate those commuter buses on the shoulder during the periods of the highest peak traffic. Again, not an ultimate solution. You are speed limited. It's not as though traffic is stopped and we're doing 70 miles an hour, but probably at least a 10 or 15 mile an hour improvement over the current condition. And then talking about what that long term might be. You know, how do we deploy different technologies in TDOT's right-of-way, whether it's I-24 or Murfreesboro Road or what have you, to give people a premium product that gets to their needs. And what, frankly, Mike, what the public has articulated to us is we need it to be faster than our cars. We need it to be fairly frequent so that not only can I get to work, but if I have a child care issue or what have you, I know I can get home, on a moment's notice. And we need it to be dependable. That's something we hear over and over again. And a challenge we have with the rush hour commute in the I-24 corridor, as you and I were talking about off camera, is throw in an accident, throw in a little bad weather, what maybe under normal circumstances is a 50-minute commute all of a sudden turns into an hour and 20 or an hour and a half commute.
Based on the number of commuters coming out of Murfreesboro and Franklin, for example, how many additional buses would you need in order to significantly improve the commute? That
commute condition. It really varies depending on the demand market. We really think that if we gave a premium product, again, where it's getting there faster, we could probably warrant a doubling of trips in this corridor. Scenario one, which is the highest end of what we're looking at, really looks toward doubling or even tripling, the frequency of service in the Murfreesboro to Nashville corridor. The other important piece for businesses in Murfreesboro in particular is the idea, and what we've heard from a lot of them, that not only do we need a good way to get people into Nashville, as businesses we need, with the low unemployment we have in Rutherford County, we need ways to get employees out of Nashville to our businesses in Rutherford County. So that's a significant piece of the elements too.
RTA has been conducting meetings like the one you conducted today. How many other meetings have you been conducting, and what's the real goal or the mission of those meetings?
Well, it's a moving target because we're literally scheduling additional meetings every day. In the front end of our process between April of 2015 and December, we engaged with about 9,000 Middle Tennesseans, a large number of them in public meetings all over the region, all over the 10-county region, quite a few others via online and social media frameworks like Facebook or the web page. We're going out now. I think we literally have 2 meetings a day pretty much scheduled in the foreseeable future throughout the region, throughout the 10-county region. But that's not the only way people need to engage. They can engage via the website. We're welcoming comments. We would love for them to take the survey that we have at nMotion2016.org to voice their preferences. And what we want to do out of this, in the front end through December of last year, we got their overall preferences. I want it fast, I want it convenient, I want it frequent. What we're trying to do now is show some alternatives. Here are 3 different scenarios of how mass transit might unfold in Middle Tennessee over the next 25 years. What are your thoughts? So you can pick a scenario and say, yeah, I really like that, or I really like this one. What I really hope that they do is get on into the comments section and say, well, this looks good, but I think you need to kind of rejigger this a little bit. And don't forget you need to serve this over here, or how would this specifically work? So we would really like this to be an ongoing dialogue. At the conclusion of that process, we'll go back to the Regional Transportation Authority Board, which is composed of the mayors of the 28 cities and counties that make up the RTA, and make short, medium, and long-term recommendations to move forward as an organization. So what our hope is, that final plan that is recommended to the board later this year truly is an accurate reflection of the preferences of the residents of Middle Tennessee and Rutherford County specifically.
Again, that website is nMotion2016.org. So nMotion2016.org, and you welcome people to go in and make these comments. Let's say that overwhelmingly it went one way or another. Let's say overwhelmingly people said we need mass transit in the form of a rail system. Yep. So that's going to be included in your report that you end up giving to whom?
That will go, well, the report will go to a lot of folks. The formal adoption process will be through the Regional Transportation Authority Board. We're also doing this process specifically in Davidson County, and that will go to the Nashville Metro Transit Authority Board. But other related folks who will be receiving it would be, the Board of Directors of the Nashville Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. A lot of overlap with the RTA Board. That's the body that guides where we put federal dollars for transportation, what projects those go into. It will go to various city and regional planning bodies. So we may say, well, okay, it makes perfect sense to do rail in this corridor, but to make it work really well, we need to see higher density zoning, or we need to see changes in land use patterns, to really leverage that investment. So we'll see it go before planning commissions. We'll see it go before city councils. We actually have a briefing scheduled in early April with the Metro Nashville Council. So our hope is that even though it would be formally adopted by the two transit authority boards, it's actually reviewed and, for lack of a better word, endorsed by literally dozens of community boards.
Based on your experience in other areas and now working here, what do you think of Senator Ketron's plan, this private partnership?
Public-private partnership, yeah. Well, the legislation, first of all, is really strong legislation. There are about 33 states that have it, so Tennessee would be joining that line. One of Senator Ketron's favorite sayings about this is we need every tool in the toolbox, and I couldn't agree with him more. That will be a very important bill, particularly if we pursue the higher end capital projects like rail. Whether it's light rail, monorail, you name it. Those are high dollar projects, and when I say high dollar, I don't mean millions with an M, I mean billions with a B, that take many years to complete, have a fair amount of risk. Many cities, Denver most notably, has made tremendous use of public-private partnerships to accelerate project delivery, get it done more quickly, and bring in private resources. So I think it'll be critically important to the future of the plan.
In order to build monorails on the interstate, on I-24 for example, how long would that take? I think Senator Ketron has said maybe 2 years, but that seems like fairly quick.
Well, there's a saying in our business, once you can get the suits and the white shirts out of the process and get the hard hats and the blue shirts into the process, that's probably not unrealistic. But realistically, there would be a number of feasibility studies and plans and the environmental work that everybody talks about that goes into a process like that. And particularly in a public-private partnership, one of the things that's required of the private investors that a full-blown investment study be done. They want to go into a project that literally could take years and a whole lot of money. They would be tied up in capital for literally 30 to 50 years in operation, that there is a return on investment. So, and all of that does take time, and that's why one of the things we advocate is don't just shoot for the moon in the long term, 30-year project. Is what are the incremental moves that we can make in the short term, whether it's bus on shoulder or additional trips or better park and ride lots that will give us incremental improvements, within a year, within 3 years, within 5 years, as we build toward that 30-year, 25-year system that will require that investment.
Who would have to improve the bus on shoulder scenario?
Sure. There's pending legislation with the state legislature to authorize bus on shoulder. 12 states currently allow it, and it works very well in cities like Raleigh, North Carolina, The suburbs of Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul region have used it very successfully. So after that authorization would be approved, then the Regional Transportation Authority would work with TDOT to look at some of the key corridors, like the I-24 corridor, to say, okay, how does this set up? Does the geometry work? Are the shoulders structurally sufficient to handle the weight of the bus in traffic? What are the safety procedures that we want to put in place? So there would be a process to look at the corridors where it would have high potential and then design those improvements. And the designs you're looking at are, how would bus on shoulder, first of all, what are the shoulder widths? What's the shoulder composition? So is it feasible to do
and the bridges
in certain segments? Where are the bridge abutments? How are the interchanges set up? We were actually at the chamber meeting earlier today. I was talking to a few individuals about, well, how would that work when you're coming up on an interchange where, say, two lanes are kind of going off? And that's all part of the geometry design. And then there are systems of what I'm calling secondary striping that kind of guide the bus operator. And then the thing that I like to emphasize is, and frankly, one of the things that the legislature accommodated us with in the legislation was mandating that whatever you allow in that bus on shoulder application, because theoretically it could be mass transit, could also be things like school buses, that whoever's operating in that space has a very formal safety and training program. That the operators of those buses know exactly what they are and are not allowed to do in bus on shoulder operation.
So based on all of that, obviously, like we said before, it's a little more complex than meets the eye. It would take some time, at least a year, before this could be a reality?
Yeah, I would say if all of the stars aligned and you had segments of shoulders, let's say in the I-24 corridor, we know there are fairly long segments that are sufficiently wide to operate bus on shoulder. So let's assume the pavement depth were appropriate for that application. It could still take a year to work out the geometry, to work out the operating procedures. And frankly, because we know it would be successful from day one, to gear up for at least the ability to provide additional service.
Are the HOV loans simply not sufficient because they get jammed up as well? Is that why you're having to go down this route?
Yeah, Commissioner Schroer, the TDOT commissioner, likes to say, and he's not saying he's proud of it, but our HOV lanes here in Middle Tennessee have about a 98% violation rate. So if you travel the interstate, as people here do every morning in the I-24 corridor, you'll notice you look in the HOV lane and it's one person, maybe two people, one person. So they really haven't been enforced. And one of the concerns with moving toward full enforcement is, well, do we really help traffic if we start pulling over hundreds of motorists? So to be frank, bus on shoulder is an approach to try to move in a direction of giving priority without really upsetting our current system.
So what kind of feedback have you gotten so far? Have you been able to look at some of the feedback? Well, obviously you've heard some of the feedback in these community meetings. What's the trend right now?
Well, so far the trend, first of all, I'm tremendously encouraged in that people are they're not taking my recommendation, they're doing it on their own, and they aren't just voting, they're commenting, because that becomes very valuable. Well, yeah, okay, I like the idea of rail, but I don't think it makes sense here, or what have you. So that's really important. But the people, and I don't want to overstate it, because the survey's been up, the materials have been up for a couple of weeks now, and largely the folks who have been responding so far are the ones who have been kind of chomping at the bit. We need to fix this problem now. So to date, if there's been any negative feedback, it's, you're not thinking big enough, you're not thinking bold enough, as opposed to, whoa, are you crazy with those numbers? So that's been something going on so far. But to be frank, we want to make sure we uncover all pockets of the community and find out what those concerns might be, because ultimately, to get a plan through, to get projects built, to get services improved, really a very wide cross-section of the community has to be represented in that, and that's what we're trying to do right now.
We should perhaps explore that a little bit, because I know when I moved here to Middle Tennessee in 2003, it was a problem then.
Yes.
That's been many years ago. Of course, we went through the recession, and some people have explained even here today that impacted it because money was taken out of transportation into the general fund. But I would like to get your analysis coming in new in 2014. What happens in communities like this where everyone recognizes there's a problem, but yet we don't move towards solutions quick enough until it becomes a crisis like it is now?
Well, I think a perfect example, and it's a much larger city. Well, I'd give two much larger cities, but you could almost envision what happens in the region. If you look at Los Angeles and Houston, Texas, so for many, many years, rapid rates of growth, numbers beyond belief, very car-oriented, car-dominated structures to those cities. Finally, it got to the point in both cities, at a point in time in their history that, if all the stars aligned, or 50 to 80 years in Nashville's future, where people said, we just can't do this anymore. We can't just keep building more lanes, or we can't do it the way we've been doing it. And now literally they are investing, Los Angeles is investing more than $20 billion to retrofit their city for mass transit. And they're having some success with it, but it's extremely expensive, extremely controversial, extremely long term. So the hope in other cities, and those examples might be, say, a Denver or Salt Lake City or a Charlotte, that are kind of seeing those trends, looking to what happened in a Houston or a Los Angeles and saying, well, let's get ahead of this curve a little earlier and try to actually build a system that we can then grow around. And that, I think, is a big part of this conversation too. One of the questions that came up at the Chamber event today was from a local council person, saying, well, how could a city or a county capitalize on a transit system to increase its property tax base? And what you're seeing around the country is where these robust systems are being built, whether rail or very high-end, largely rail, but some of the higher-end bus rapid transit system is, people want to develop around those stations. That becomes an amenity that's attractive, particularly to younger people or empty nesters who want to be within walking distance of transit to go longer distances. So the cities that are capitalizing on that through changes in planning and zoning uses to allow, say, greater density or taller buildings, not 100 stories, but maybe 5, 6, 7 stories, they're seeing that increase in tax base, and they're seeing the ability to have people move to those locations where a smaller percentage of their trips can take place in a single occupant car. The single occupant auto is here to stay. I mean, it's our dominant form of transportation. It will be for the foreseeable future. But if we can take a subset of those trips that people are making in their own cars today, convert those to alternate forms, whether that's mass transit or it's walking or what have you, that goes a long way toward fixing the traffic congestion problem, and also gives people more choices, which is really key.
Part of the problem with something like mass transit is that it takes everyone's involvement in the region in order to support it. You may have some communities like Murfreesboro that realize it's a big problem and they may even want to do something. Is there any flexibility for a community really pushing an idea, even passing some kind of referendum in order to push it further?
Yep. Well, one of the issues that came up at the Chamber meeting today, there had been legislation proposed earlier in the legislative session of the state to allow greater flexibility for local government to create its own funding stream, a mechanism for mass transit, but also general transportation improvements. So in one county, it might be a big mass transit improvement. In another county, it might be roadway or bridge improvements. That legislation isn't going to move this year. There's a good chance it would be reintroduced next year. But we absolutely need at the regional and the local level to have those mechanisms in place for a city of Murfreesboro or a Rutherford County or Nashville-Davidson County to be able to say, look, our needs can't be met by a very generic state program or federal program. We need to take matters into our own hands, solve our problems with our solutions, with our resources. And the cities that have been successful in doing that were the ones who came up with that comprehensive plan that the citizens said, yeah, we can believe in this. This is something we want to shoot toward. Then identified those funding mechanisms largely at the local level to get that plan kick-started. And I think that's a real key step in this process.
What is a good example of a city doing that? Is Charlotte one of those or not?
Charlotte has started doing it. They're kind of on the front end. They had their first rail starter line that opened probably 6 or 7 years ago. One of the things that Charlotte's doing well, as I mentioned earlier, is they're aligning their overall land use plans around those transit facilities. So when they decided where that rail line was going to go, they started doing upzoning, they started allowing more density, and that's some of the hottest property in that region is developing around that line. They're now expanding that system. If you look further along in the evolution of a city, Denver's a great example. And by the way, the Nashville metropolitan area in 25 years is projected to be larger than the Denver region. So when people say, well, Denver's such a big city, it doesn't resemble what we resemble. Denver's about the size we'll be in 25 years, and they've invested heavily in a light rail system, seeing tremendous ridership gains. Now, don't get me wrong, Denver still has traffic, but you have a choice. You can get on that rail system, you can get in quickly, and again, they're seeing tremendous development around stations, so communities are clamoring to get those investments so that they can take part in that economic growth.
So in some ways there's a lack of consciousness about the city that we are, the city that we're going to become, and it may be that to some extent the public's ahead of leadership on some of these issues because people are coming from outside where there are mass transit systems and they're like, why don't they have mass transit here? Why is it that we get behind cities like Charlotte or others? Is there something about this culture here that you've observed that is different?
No, I don't think so. I mean, to be honest with you, in all the markets I've worked in, we used to have the saying that everybody wants things to be better, they just don't want them to be any different. It's hard to get, when you're sitting in traffic on I-24 every morning, you know that there needs to be a change. You know that, and you have seen it get worse. I mean, as you mentioned, I've been here a year and a half, and I know I've experienced traffic getting worse in that period of time. So we all know we need to do something. But then when you start saying, well, okay, here are the ideas of what we might do, and here's what some of them would cost, people start to get a little nervous about that because it's the money, but it's also, well, wait a minute, would that really work, and would that development occur? So it's really a natural process for people to kind of say, okay, what are our alternatives? Is that a future that I really want to relate to, relative to what's going on now? Building up that base of support, and entities like the Mayor's Caucus. The Mayor's Caucus is a group of the mayors of the cities and counties all over Middle Tennessee. The chambers of commerce, like the Rutherford County Chamber, have really been leading on this effort, saying if we want to continue to attract business, to create jobs, to be able to keep our youth, our sons, our daughters, our grandsons and granddaughters in the region, we've got to grow jobs. And this is what companies are looking for, whether it's companies that are looking to grow here, that are already here, or companies looking to relocate, is we've got to be able to move around better. So it's a natural part of the progression, and frankly what's exciting to me about it is Nashville is today where Denver was 30 years ago, when people in Denver said, this is a problem we've got to figure out how to solve. Ultimately they came to their solution. Where Charlotte was 15 years ago, when the same thing happened there, where Dallas, Texas was 40 years ago, and they now have more miles of light rail than any city in North America. So I think that's the excitement and the optimism is people here get it. They're smart enough to understand, what the issues are and what will and won't work. And once we can kind of articulate and get people solidified around it, get a lot of questions answered. One of the things I'm continually impressed by and enthusiastic about is the quantity and quality of questions, whether it's in our online forums or our public meetings. People get it, they ask great questions, and they engage in the dialogue. So I'm very optimistic that we'll get to a good end.
So Steve, as we wrap it up here, let's briefly go over those three scenarios, and if you can, kind of associate a general cost, an estimated cost around them so everyone knows, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm going to do a couple things with the cost, because when you tell people an overall cost, their minds freak out. Even the engineers and planners who are working on it, when we're talking about the multiple billion-dollar scenarios, they keep saying millions. And I say, it's not millions, it's billions. And everybody says, that's a hard word to get out of your mouth.
Billions is a hard word,
yeah. But scenario one, which is the comprehensive regional system, incorporates a lot of rail, extensive service improvements. You would project transit ridership would go up by something like 500%, that in a corridor like the I-24 commute corridor into downtown Nashville, there would be viable options that would cut your travel time half to two-thirds, or a third to a half, compared to what it is today. Total cost to construct estimated, and what we say about this is don't write the numbers down in stone. They're intended to be for comparative purposes. So all of this changes based on site conditions, what have you. Total cost to build about $5.4 billion. Huge number. But the one thing about the growth we're seeing, Mike, is 1 million more people projected to come to this region over the next 25 years. They're going to bring their traffic with them, but they're also going to bring their money with them. So the people who live here today aren't the only ones bearing that burden. We broke that down to about $227 per person per year, 69 cents a day or so.
And in terms of the form, it would come in terms of the tax. You're not really saying, you just know that's how much it would cost.
No, yeah, that's generally what you've seen other regions do is say, let's articulate around a plan that people can get enthusiastic about. Let's say, okay, here's about what we need to raise. So whether you want to say 69 cents a day per person or $220 a year per person. And then what are the best ways to do that? And that could be a combination of private investment, certainly passenger fares factor into that mix, and then it's the various public sector forms that would go into it.
And that's scenario one.
That's scenario one, 5.4 billion. Scenario two has some pretty interesting and pretty high-end improvements, including full freeway bus rapid transit, so a much better way to commute into Nashville from Murfreesboro along the I-24 corridor, and that's in at about $2.1 billion. Does not have the impact that scenario one does. The frequency of service isn't as great, the duration of service isn't as great, but does hit some of those key commute corridors. Doesn't make it quite as, what I'll say, 24-hour system or multi-purpose a system as scenario one. And that's at about $2.1 billion. And then scenario three, and that factors out to about $127 per year per person. Scenario three basically says, we're going to improve service, we're going to improve the system, but we're only going to do it in proportion to population growth. So it keeps per capita spending about what it is now, so you're not really looking at fundamentally new sources of funding. There are some improvements, particularly in the areas of technology, better park and ride lots, that type of thing. But frankly, it does not, if that's the way the region goes, we better be figuring out what else we want to do, because it does nothing to address the long-term growth in congestion and the erosion of quality of life. It sort of assumes if that were the way the region were going to go, mass transit really isn't a viable part of the equation. Even though it's not feasible to expand our roadway capacity, it's pushing in that direction. Or more likely, what it would say is, you know what, it's not really viable in this region for Rutherford County and Murfreesboro to continue to grow at this pace. We're going to have to push that growth over to Dixon County or Cheatham County or areas that frankly aren't faced with the level of congestion that we have here today.
So that's more of a conservative, quick fix approach that doesn't solve the problem long
What a
term.
lot of our board members of the RTA and the MTA have said is, this isn't an option, it's a phase. The stuff in scenario three are the things we do where people can see quick demonstrations of success in a 1 to 5 year time frame while we are working toward that long-range system. And we're hearing that very clearly from the chambers of commerce, the business community, and frankly from a lot of the general public. If scenario three is what you're asking me to vote on, I am not voting on it. You know, if you're telling me it's things we can do while we're working toward the higher end, you know, aspirations, yeah, I'm all for it.
Again, you want to hear from people at nMotion
nMotion
2016.
.org. Exactly, and there's tons of materials, tons of reports you can get as engaged or not as you want to. You can request meetings. If, say, a civic group says, we'd like to have you guys come out and talk about this to our members, you can request a meeting there. Literally hundreds of pages of reports, a lot of summary reports too, that are pretty quick. And again, the interactive survey is up right now, and we're very interested in having people do that.
All right, Steve Bland from the Regional Transportation Authority. Thanks for explaining all this to us, and good luck with this big, challenging endeavor.
Thank you, and good luck to you. We're all in it together.